Dr. Conrad Murray's own words again ringing out in the courtroom as the third week of his trial in the death of Michael Jackson begins. Jurors heard Murray tell LAPD detectives how he broke the news of Jackson's death to his children and the rest of the Jackson family. Also today, the LA County Deputy Medical Examiner explained why it was unlikely Jackson administered the lethal dose of propofol himself. One of the detectives who interviewed Murray was grilled by defense attorneys, and legal analyst R.J. Manuelian will be here to break it all down.
But first, the man who's now accused of killing Michael Jackson was the same man who had to tell the children their father was dead. Jurors heard today more of the audio tape, along with the answer Dr. Murray gave when the family asked him, how did it happen?
I hug them all, give them comfort to Paris, comfort to Prince, comfort to Blanket, which is a last little guy, because whenever they were sick, they would always ask for Dr. Conrad. Please call Dr. Conrad, Daddy. And I give them comfort. Mrs. Jackson was not in that room. The Mrs. Jackson, his mother. After they cried and cried and cried, his daughter uttered a lot of words of unhappiness, and she would live alone without her dad, and she didn't want to be an orphan. And real sad, real sad. She's like my daughter. And I told her, we will take care of her. And she asked me, Dr. Murray, she said, you save a lot of patients, you save people with heart attacks. You didn't save my dad. I said, I tried my best. And she said, I know that, Dr. Murray, at least I know you tried your best. I know you tried your best, but I'm really sad. I wouldn't wake up in the morning and I wouldn't be able to see my daddy. I went into the bigger room with the family, a big conference room. I sat with the family. Mrs. Jackson, I pulled my chair all the way up to her. The toilet was right there. I held their hands. I asked them if they had any questions. They asked me, do you know why he died? My answer was no.
So what do those recordings do to the prosecution and the defense case?
All right, Susan Hirasuna here, someone who knows a thing or two about cases like this one. You've covered many of them. And defense attorney R.J. Manuelian. Now, what is this? Well, let's talk about what it does for the prosecution, R.J.
Well, it shows that he omitted important facts, never mentioned the propofol, which is something that is going to argue to the jurors is important because it shows his consciousness of guilt. The timeline, he really doesn't go into that. And he sort of makes self-serving statements. He says things that are good about him. So in that sense, it's good for the defense. It humanizes him. It shows a doctor that's caring, is soft-spoken, is very careful in his words. He keeps mentioning over and over that he slowly infused the propofol, and his defense attorney said that in opening statement. So they're showing a very careful doctor, and they're trying to show that this is maybe medical malpractice in the best case scenario, but doesn't rise to the level of gross negligence, which is the case charge.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the clip that we heard, Susan. Does the prosecution gain some sympathy from the jurors, do you think?
I think it cuts both ways, actually. Well, because he sounds so emotional and so intimate with the family. You can't believe, just by listening to that clip, that audio clip, that he could be so reckless with such a precious life.
And we had an analyst on last night who said, these are his words. This is what he's saying happened and went down at the hospital. And who's to counter that right now?
Exactly. And there was some suggestion that Paris wants to testify, but they don't know whether or not it would be advisable to put her on the stand.
And RJ, as you listen to this, do you see or sense a well-coached doctor by a lawyer?
Yes, I do. I think that he was very careful in his words. He met with Ed Chernoff before because he's the one that set up the interview, and it was an interview. So, it was done very well. But as a defense attorney, I'm very critical because you never want to walk your client into a police interview, typically. Because now it's going before a jury and they're hearing everything and you're marrying your client to the story. You're locking them in. So whatever he didn't say or did say or the timeline, it's all going to hurt them because they're stuck to this one story. So either he's going to have to testify or they're going to have to argue in front of the jury as far as what happened and how it happened.
But he testifies, he's up for cross-examination, and they could just destroy the story.
They don't have to put, actually, what's the good part about the interview is he doesn't need to take the stand. He's actually testified already.
He has, yeah.
But in the meantime, the defense will say, we came to this interview, we came to it willingly. Even the police say at that point they didn't believe they had a criminal investigation.
Right.
They just needed more information. They wanted to get a timeline. They wanted to get an idea of what happened on those events. And so the defense has said repeatedly, my client came.
Hide, right?
He had nothing. Listen to how forthcoming he sounds. Listen how he just talks and talks and talks.
And the defense said there was no limit to the amount of time they spent with the detectives. They let it go as long as they wanted. But RJ, we keep hearing from attorneys who say, I would not do this with my client. I would not take my client to this kind of interview. Why did they do it then?
Well, I think if you go back to when this all happened, there was speculation that he was avoiding the police and he was running from the police, so he became a target. So I think the strategy of the defense became, why don't we just go to the police and show them we have nothing to hide? But again, you don't want to do that. It's something that most criminal defense attorneys don't do. And we're going to find out how it affected the case.
Yeah.
And I think it might not affect it in a good way, but we'll have to wait and see.
All right, so what do others think about how day 10 played out? Hal Eisner talked to 3 people who aren't afraid to be brutally honest, because they've worked in this system.
So we're in day 10.
Okay.
Has the prosecution proven anything in your way of thinking?
I don't believe so.
A retired cop, a defense attorney, and a retired judge, all of whom have strong opinions about the Conrad Murray interview played in court. An over 2-hour interview recorded 2 days after Michael Jackson died. To former LAPD Detective Don Tabak, the interview between Murray, his attorney Ed Chernoff, and Sergeant Scott Smith wasn't hard-hitting.
The way that interview came off, where he wasn't demanding any kind of an answer, he wasn't challenging Dr. Murray. It paints Dr. Murray as a compassionate man, as a man that really felt that he needed to do something, and it doesn't show him as being some kind of a thug or
so
some
when
kind of an animal.
when he's talking about wanting to console the children.
Oh, absolutely.
And then they really were weeping, really weeping. I stayed there. I hugged them all, give them comfort to Paris, comfort to Prince, comfort to Blanket.
I agree with the detective. I believe that had the decedent been anybody other than the king of pop, this would be a civil case.
To the judge, though, it should be a criminal one.
You've got to remember, in terms of gross negligence, he's held to the standard of a physician.
To Chiavelli, there's no smoking gun here, but the interview does point to potential problems, like when Murray left Jackson's bedroom.
He could have gone to urinate, Dr. Murray, before he gave him the propofol. He's gone for 2 minutes. In that 2 minutes, Michael Jackson, who's finally asleep, gets up, administers propofol to himself, and by the time in that 2 minutes that the doctor gets back, he's dying. I mean, that gives me a lot of trouble.
To this one-time detective who investigated 100 cases of his own, this case is a waste of time.
You don't think that LAPD should have gone after him, and you don't think this case ought to be on trial?
I think LAPD in this day and age has a lot better things to do.
That's one lawman's opinion, not this one on the stand, or this one who thinks the prosecution is proving its case. With the judge, Winston, and Don, Hal Eisner, Fox 11 News.
So, RJ, I have just one question about that.
Yeah.
The burden of proof. Okay, so you have murder 1, you have give me the steps. You get the highest one is first-degree murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter. So what is the burden of proof all the way down to involuntary manslaughter? Is it just reasonable doubt?
It's always reasonable doubt. It's the highest level of certainty required under law, and that's what I would keep hitting over and over again to the jury. You always got to show the jury, look, he may have committed some sort of mild negligence, which may amount to medical malpractice, but gross negligence, a crime, no, it hasn't been met.
I thought it was very interesting to hear the one guest with Hal Eisner say a waste of LAPD time. Thoughts on that?
I was very surprised.
Yeah.
That was very honest of him to say that. I'm glad he said that. You know, not to discredit that, but there is enough evidence, I think, to go to a jury, but I just don't think it's going to reach that threshold, which is beyond the reasonable doubt, the highest level of certainty required under the law.
And remember, the sentence is 4 years.
Yeah.
And in our current prison system, 4 years is really not going to equate that much time behind bars if that's what people are going to want for Dr. Murray as justice for Michael.
And I don't think he'll do the 4 years. He'll probably get probation and know that just losing his license will be punishment enough. I think the judge understands that.
All right,
Okay.
well, it was some of the most graphic testimony of the trial so far.
And then he stops breathing, and all of this takes place in a 2-minute period of time.
Why a deputy medical examiner says only one person could be responsible for Michael Jackson's death. That's coming up next.